Every year we decide on a theme and we call for applications from all over Scotland for short projects, and we select 12 participants and they are put through 3 rather intensive weekend workshops in order to develop further their ideas. So we discuss development, research, directing, pitching, trailer making. And then the selected participants have to pitch their project in front of an industry panel before they get commission. Once they get commission, they have a budget of £8,000 to make their short film, and they are supported by SDI throughout the process. And once the film is finished, they usually premiere either at the Edinburgh International Film Festival or at Glasgow International Film Festival, as it's the case this year, and then go on being distributed internationally. So as I said, it's a flagship program and it's also an award-winning program. I mean, the films have screened all over the world multiple times in the main film festivals like Sundance, Tribeca, IDFA, Sheffield Doc Fest. We also had an Oscar short listing a few years ago. I think the only nation that is still resisting a little bit to bridging the gap is France. Despite me being around, it didn't help, but we're working hard on it. So maybe this bridging the gap year will be the year that is going to crack the French festival distribution. But yeah, this is about bridging the gap, and I'm really happy and delighted to welcome the 5 commissioned filmmakers for last year on the theme of Turbulence. So we have Giulia, Candussi, Jack Goessens, Will Hewitt, Austen, McCowan, and Patrick Steele, who were commissioned in January 2020. But something got in the way, as you might have noticed, a little pandemic. So for the first time ever, the Bridging the Gap films had to be delayed, the production had to be delayed. And it came with quite a lot of obstacle for our filmmakers. And I'm sure they'll be happy to discuss this with you at a later stage. But without further ado, I think I'm just going to jump in and ask the filmmakers to introduce themselves, to introduce their films, and we'll have a few questions for them, but then we'll open the floor to questions. So don't hesitate. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. You automatically go to the top of our screen and you can ask your question, or you can also use the chat box if you want to, and I'll read the question to our filmmakers. So I think I'm just going to start with you, Giulia, because you're just on my right on my screen. So if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and about your film.
Hi everyone, my name is Giulia. I worked as a photojournalist for about a decade and then discovered a great passion for documentaries. And this is probably going to be my first real documentary that's going to be distributed internationally. And my documentary is called Against the Tide. And it's the story of a journey of a lady to become a full-time member of a remote community on the west coast of Scotland. So Hewitt is a very, very small island on the west coast of Scotland when there's a community of 10 people living in complete isolation, in deep connection with nature, the land, and the tide. And they try to live as sustainably as possible. They grow their own food and they have rainwater. And they also work with their spirituality. And so this documentary is about the journey of this lady. And you're going to have to watch the documentary to find out if she's going to become a member of the community or not.
Perfect cliffhanger. So Giulia, your film is very observational and very intimate. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more how, as a filmmaker, you made a space for yourself in this really close-knit community. How did you manage to make them trust you and to capture all these very intimate moments?
I guess you need to be very honest and upfront and tell them why you're there and why you want to make it. In my particular case, I was very passionate about the idea of documenting how an alternative lifestyle is without any prejudice, and so I thought I was, just telling them what I felt. And there is actually an episode that I'd like to share with you that sums up a little bit of everything. So, as I said, this lady will have to be either accepted or not accepted by the community. And there is a specific moment, like a ceremony, where everyone in the community comes together and they will tell them if she's going to be a member or not. And so it's a very powerful moment, and I've been waiting for that for a long time. And the night just before this event, there was a bit of an argument between the community members, and they were not so happy for me to film that. And I said, well, like, I came all the way here, I've been with you for many days, and like, if I can't film that, like, my film won't stand, like, it won't make any sense. And so I couldn't sleep that night. It was terrible. Like, I felt so bad because I knew what I wanted to do, but at the same time I understood like how they felt, because maybe seeing me with the camera was going to be very intruding, and it's a special moment of their lives. So what did I do? Well, I just waited, and then in the morning, they have a morning meeting every morning where they set the intentions of what they were going to do in that day. And so I decided to speak. Anyone can speak during the morning meeting. Normally I wouldn't speak because I was just observing, but I felt that day that I needed to say something. And so I decided to just, share what I had inside, like my deep feelings. And I said, I'm not here to like steal any moments or put you in a bad light. What I really want is just to show how you live in an honest and truthful way, with all, the good sides and bad side and the feelings and everything. And it's not just, I'm showing up here with the camera and just filming whatever happens. I really truly care about this, and well, apparently my speech worked, because in the end they said, well, we are just seeing everything from a completely different light. It's like we pictured you in a way, not necessarily you, but like the whole documentary in a way. And now that you've spoken to us, like, we see it completely differently. And we understand how passionate you are and how important this is for like the wider audience to understand how we live and why we do this. And so they were very happy, and they decided to let me film, and I even managed to put a mic on them. And so we've got quite nice reactions from the members and the main character, Jill.
Well, thank you, Giulia. It's a really heartfelt statement on building trust and relationship with your protagonist. It works when you tell the truth. Well, thank you very much, Giulia. I'm going to go to Jack now. Jack, could you tell us a bit more about your project?
Yeah, so my project is called Everyman, and it's a story about the social side of gender transition. So the kind of comparing and contrasting life as female compared to being perceived as male now.
And could you tell us a bit more about your background and where you're coming from? Because that will inform the form you decided for your film, you chose for your film.
Well, I as a filmmaker, I usually work a lot in fiction, and as I work in post-production professionally as well, mostly in fiction. So that was partly what informed the kind of visual essay style of this documentary. But another part of it was also that I'm talking about things that have already happened mostly. So you can't go out and just shoot them live. And a lot of it is also just in my head, which, the best way to visualize that is by just staging scenes, going a bit mad.
So yeah, you've mentioned that you were staging scenes. So I think you've decided to challenge the documentary form quite a bit. I think the common perception of documentary is that it's reality, it's things happening in front of the camera and being captured. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit about pushing those boundaries of traditional documentary and using scripted scenes to maybe explore very intimate moments of very intimate experiences.
Yeah, I guess interestingly enough, I didn't think of using kind of reenactment as like a new thing in documentary, because you do see it. I guess it's more factual, you know, kind of broadcast documentary that you do see kind of reenactments. Um, so I didn't think about it in that sense, but what I did kind of think about a lot is how, like, I was very aware that I'm showing my perspective, and kind of, you know, memory is flawed, and, you know, what I'm talking about and what I'm saying is my truth, but it's not necessarily the truth. Which, you know, which I think is true for any story that you tell, not specifically this one. So I just kind of wanted to be truthful about that, and just be like, well, this is how I see it, which which sometimes isn't, because I didn't do like straight reenactments. It was like sometimes some of them are just like, you don't really know what you're looking at, because that's what was in my head. So I thought, well, I'll just show it, and if that doesn't make sense to people, then that's fine. But at least the feeling that I have and the things that are in my head, that's what I'm trying to convey, and like I hope that people can feel it, even if they don't really understand it. And I think that's part. I mean, I think that's also a big part of being trans. For like years, you don't really understand what you're feeling. So I tried to make the audience feel that. I have a lot of conversations with people who want to know, you know, they're like, I don't really understand this. How does this feel? And I'm like, well, I can't really tell you that, because you can't really verbalize feelings in that way. So, you know, hopefully, you know, this is kind of giving an answer. I think it's probably a really unsatisfying answer, because it's a really, you know, it's feelings. It's confusing.
Well, it's your vision as a documentary filmmaker. So thank you very much, Jack. Will, Austen, I'm going to move to you. If you could say, tell us a bit more about Harmonic Spectrum.
Hi, I'm Will Hewitt. I'm the co-director and editor of Harmonic Spectrum. Harmonic Spectrum is about Sean, who uses the piano to navigate life on the autistic spectrum. And I'll let Austen introduce our company.
Yeah, I'm Austen, as the other co-director. Will and I kind of have been working as co-director. We've been friends for, you know, I think we calculated the other day, it's like 13 years, which is an unlucky number, but it's been going well. But we set up our production company, Melt the Fly, like 2 or 3 years ago, and started making creative documentaries. So this is the latest in our kind of on the kind of journey. It sort of follows on from a film we made before about a short documentary we kind of produced and directed ourselves about the Pianodrome, which is a venue in Edinburgh. And this is the film Harmonic Spectrum, takes you kind of deeper into one of the characters we met while we were kind of creating that film, but we realized we couldn't fit him into the story of this Pianodrome. It was its own film. So when we applied to Bridging the Gap with it, it was really nice to kind of develop it and really take it on this journey, which has been longer than expected, but really amazing.
So as you say, Sean, your character is someone who's extremely creative and almost larger than life character, which can be a blessing and a curse for a filmmaker, because when your protagonist starts becoming very performative, it's really difficult to get to their core, to get to know what they're actually feeling and thinking, and maybe get some answers from them. So I suppose I wanted to ask you, what if you could maybe share some of the challenges you met with working with this highly creative protagonist, and how did you manage to bring the audience into his world?
We figured out quite early on, basically Sean said this statement, which is like, he wakes up in the morning and then he doesn't really know how he's feeling until he sits down at the piano, and then the music that kind of flows out of his subconscious, he then reads that to understand himself. And it was kind of the same process for us. Is like every day when we meet Sean, we're not necessarily sure what kind of mood he's going to be in. So a thing we picked up quite early on that worked for everyone is to sit Sean in front of the piano, which is why there's a lot of interviews where he's just doing that. And then you can basically, whenever there's a struggle to kind of verbalize or express an emotion, it comes through the piano. And then that's kind of when we get to the point of what he's thinking or what he's trying to say.
Yeah, I think just to kind of follow on from something Will said there, is it kind of works both ways in that, as kind of Will said, we find it hard to read Sean because he doesn't necessarily know how he's expressing himself until he's at the piano. But equally, another thing he says in the film, because of so Sean's on the autistic spectrum, and he finds it difficult or has had to study and learn how to read other people as well. So once you kind of realize that it works both ways, you're kind of more able to find that middle ground and actually allow him to feel comfortable. But kind of, as Will said, like not knowing what kind of mood he would be in, and it is a blessing and a curse. But I think we've kind of found one of the most difficult days to film was, I think, has kind of led to one of my favorite moments in the film, which comes kind of in the middle when Sean's sitting alone at a grand piano, and you really kind of get a window into that thought process that Will described, where he's kind of struggling to work through something and then he finds it through what he's playing on the piano. And that shoot in itself was one of those occasions where we were actually pushing him in the wrong direction, trying to force him to talk about something he really didn't want to talk about. And in the end, I think when we kind of laid off and let him kind of just stop and think and feel and play the piano, we kind of got some of the nicest stuff. So it is just a balance with a creative contributor, and he did have crazy ideas as well, which we weren't able to get in the film, partly to do with the limitations we had because of COVID in the end, but also it was just they were a bit wild.
But we had a few crazy ideas as well that didn't happen.
So that will be for Harmonic Spectrum too, post-COVID. Thank you very much, guys. And finally, Patrick. Oh, I wonder if Patrick is frozen a little bit. Can you hear us, Patrick? Yeah.
I can hear you, yeah.
Oh.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Patrick. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself and your film?
Sure. Hi, I'm Patrick Steele. I'm the director of Racing Stock, which is a film about Taylor Borthwick, who, when we started production, was 15 years old, and she was the Scottish Mini Stocks national champion, which is a stock car league. And when she turned 16, she moved from the Mini Stocks League, which is 11 to 16 years old, into the Adult Stock Rods League, which is 16 to 65 years old. And so suddenly she was the youngest in this adult league and one of the only female drivers. And so we followed her journey through that.
So are you a stock racing fan? How did you find Taylor? And also I have a second part to my question is also, it's quite challenging to film a sports which is quite dangerous and when speed is involved. So I was wondering how did you manage that as well?
Well, the answer to your first question is that I wouldn't have described myself before making the film as a stock racing fan. but I was brought up in Fife, and I remember going to a couple of meetings at the race wall in Cowdenbeath, and so I moved up to Edinburgh a couple of years ago from London. I've been living in London for about 20 years or something, and then moved back. And I remember looking for stories, positive stories, sort of that I could film in roughly the local area. And I remembered the race wall, and so I approached Dave, who's the manager of the race wall there, just asking if there were any young racers that were coming through that he thought might be interesting to talk to. And so that's how I met Taylor. And then from there, it's just an amazing community, the whole stock car scene. And so then I got to know all sorts of people through that, which is brilliant. So I now would say that I am a stock car racing fan. And then in answer to your second question, I think all I can say is that GoPros are my friends. Like in terms of filming, that sort of fast moving action in a safe way on a budget. It's amazing what you can excuse me. It's amazing what you can do with the GoPros. Just luckily the stock cars are designed in a way that they have these sort of bars either side of them that are quite handy for just strapping a GoPro to. But I would say also, and Will could probably speak to this as well, because he came and kindly filmed with me for one day of the racing, that just getting the filming the cars is because it is so fast. It is a real challenge, just getting the action. And my hat goes off to the sort of sports camera people who do this day in and day out. It's not easy, but we had great access, and we were able to position ourselves inside the track and at various points around the track to get the shots we needed. And so so we made it work.
Thank you. It's funny hearing you all talk about your projects. You realize there are stories of immersion. You've all, in one way or the other, really immersed yourself into a different environment or into the life of your protagonist, and it's really fascinating. And it's the beauty of documentary, I suppose. I was wondering if anyone had any question at this stage, whether it's for all the filmmakers or for one filmmaker in particular, or if you have any question about bridging the gap in general. You can raise your hand or send us a little message in the chat box. No?
I'm trying to see if there's any hands going up. I can only see.
Oh, Phil, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, sure. It's an ill-formed question about resolution, and it's difficult to ask because I'm not going to get to actually see the films until the weekend. But from the way you described them, I could sort of imagine both for Giulia's film and for Patrick's a sort of beginning, middle, and end, and how those stories might resolve themselves. But for Jack and Austen and Will, it's not as obvious hearing you talk about how the film will resolve. And the question, I guess, is how you make a decision about whether you as a storyteller are going to make the resolution for us, or do you leave the film in such a way that we, the audience, have to create our own resolution, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Phil. Yep.
I think I'd be happy to give you an answer. So we sort of set out with a different idea in mind at the start, and as is often the case with documentary, you kind of have to adapt to the changing situation around you. And I think one thing we didn't really mention when we talked about the film there was that another element of the story was kind of Sean finding not just his kind of his feet within music, but within kind of a collaborative relationship. So there's another person who comes into the film, Anthony, and the two of them and how they got on and what ended up happening to them over the course of our production kind of helped us to realize the resolution. So we didn't really set out with the resolution in mind, but their kind of musical collaboration and their friendship helped us to see how we could end the film when our whole plan had been kind of changed. So I guess it's a little bit of a, for me, it felt like it's a little bit of both. You're always, you're always looking for it, because you kind of wouldn't start out if you didn't think you could finish it. But we had to wait for it to kind of present itself. And I think we actually had a couple of false endings, because we thought Anthony was going to go back to where he's from in the States, and then he couldn't actually get out because of COVID. So it was like, oh, right, well, that wasn't it. So, so I hope that helps answer. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything, but.
No.
I can answer the question for my film as well, unless you want to say something about. No. Okay. So I've actually told my story chronologically. So I actually started in my childhood, and then I just go forward. So it's a lot more straightforward than it sounded. And I talk you through my journey, and then at the end of it, I kind of reflect back on it, and the resolution is kind of bookended, where I draw a link with the start again. So it's yeah.
Well, thank you.
And it's interesting because Bridging the Gap has a training aspect attached to it, and during the workshop there is a lot of work done around trying to develop a story and try to think what the starting point might be, what the end point might be, but also keeping in mind that things might change. So it's that tricky balance of always pitching a project which might slightly change along the way, but being extremely ready to embrace those changes and turn them into creative fuel for your film always. And I suppose that's what Bridging the Gap filmmakers have always been really good at doing, is no matter what is thrown their way, a pandemic, they manage to complete their films and to find another storyline, or to find this other narrative energy somewhere, because they know the film they want to make. So doesn't matter what happens, they'll make the film. Anybody else has got a question for our filmmakers?
Can I ask a question? I was wanting to ask Austen and Will. You mentioned earlier that you make your own films, and sounds like you just maybe distribute them yourself. But I wondered why, if you're kind of, I guess, happy enough to do that, what was it about Bridging the Gap that appealed to you? Yeah, why did you decide to apply for this, and what maybe makes it different to doing your own?
Yeah, I think the answer is that we had experience with one broadcast documentary, but I think basically it's just so bloody difficult to get any film made. And the first documentary we made was just kind of completely fueled by us chucking ourselves in, and we were running on adrenaline. And I think after that, we maybe took a step back and thought, oh, we could potentially use some experienced professional advice here and maybe make the processes a bit easier. And some of the guest lecturers that Bridging the Gap gave us were like absolutely phenomenal. So I think Mila Tarajlik, that weekend when we had Mila, who directed a film called The Other Side of Everything, that was a really huge turning point for Harmonic Spectrum, because it was that moment of constructive criticism, which is kind of hard to take, but really, really important to hear. And she basically said, you're in danger of this film looking pedestrian. And, Sean's personality is anything but that. So we really need to make a film that caters towards that personality. And I think, it's just the time. It's not really a quick fix. I think Bridging the Gap kind of accepts that films take time and it's difficult. And, you do have to give up every weekend not every weekend, but a lot of weekends to develop the idea. But ultimately, you kind of come out with a huge benefit for the film. And it's incredibly nice knowing we have Alexandra on the distribution. that helps a lot, because the work doesn't end when the film ends. There's still a lot to do.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I think also just to add, like, it is a little bit of what Flor mentioned before. You know, bridging the gap's been going on for 18 years, and the films, like, having kind of being from Edinburgh and kind of watching those films over the years and kind of witnessing where people go next, and just it was really nice to think that, you know, if we applied when we got into the development phase of bridging the gap, that, you know, we could potentially be selected to make one of these films, and just knowing the kind of quality of filmmakers that have done it before and the films that have come out before, and the kind of, I guess also people have said to us quite a lot, you're quite lucky that you're co-directors, and we do co-direct our films and we work together all the time, and it is nice because you have that other person to bounce ideas off of, and kind of also, you know, cry on their shoulder when things get real tough. But it is another addition to that, is to kind of remember there's a community of other filmmakers out there, and bridging the gap kind of helped us to, I think, not just with the short but also with the feature documentary that we're currently kind of producing, to kind of embrace that team attitude, and, you know, realize that there comes a point in every film where you start needing to get that constructive criticism and work with other people and listen, as well as kind of try and put your own vision on everything. And I think bridging the gap helped us to start thinking more clearly about, you know, the realities of documentary at every stage, rather than just, you know, make it, get it out there.
Yeah, I think we basically just, we all want to be Hannah Curry, so that's why we did it.
So for those of you who don't know Hannah made a film, a Bridging the Gap film, a couple of years ago called That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which had a stellar life in festivals and in the UK and internationally. But I think it's a really nice point about collaboration, and I think that's what we're trying to do with Bridging the Gap as well, is to encourage people to team up with producers and with technicians who can help them in their journey. So I'm just saying hello to some of the producers of the Bridging the Gap films, which I can see are here with us today, and yeah, and I think short filmmaking can be a very solitary process, and if a budget does help you make work with other professionals. So I'm really always very happy when people decide to choose decide to work with other professionals. Do we have any other questions? Chat box is still open.
Well,
Anne?
Someone else have a...
Anne, yes.
There you go.
Yeah, so thank you. I suppose just to build on that last conversation, how much interaction is there between the different producers of each of the films during, you know, the way the Bridging the Gap program is constructed? Do you learn from each other as that as well? Or, you know, like I heard the reference to the bringing in the external, obviously bringing in the opportunity to hear and discuss with other people in the field. I'm just interested how much of a cohort, I suppose, it makes up of people who are on the Bridging the Gap programme. Thanks.
Thank you. And anyone wants to jump in? Patrick?
Yeah, I can answer that, I think. I mean, it's there was, I think, three very intense weekends in the development, and I think you know, you have to go in with a completely open mind in terms of both your own film, but also all of the other films that, you know, everyone brings their own ideas, and over the course of those 3 weekends, you know, whatever you started with at the beginning is not going to be what you come out with at the end, and by the end of it, I think it's just an amazing process in terms of having not only, I think we had, was it Grant Keir, Ellen Shakarifa, and Mila, who Will and Austen mentioned, all of whom had very different approaches to all of our ideas, and so you were sort of constantly holding up this idea and like looking at it in a slightly different way, but you also had 10 other, you know, documentary minds who are all like thinking away on your idea as well as everyone else's. And I think one of the really lovely things to come out of it is that, you know, we're all still in touch. We have like a WhatsApp group together, and it feels like a very supportive, quite collegiate sort of thing. But also that, you know, for those of us who are lucky enough to win the commission, the SDI just does a great job, as Will and Austen were saying, of hooking you up with brilliant people. Yeah, so you know, I got a chance to work with Charlotte's here in the group. I think produced my film. And I know everyone else. Just with that budget, it just allows you to lift the film, but also work with people that perhaps you might not have had a chance to work with before. And I think that's really invaluable too.
I might add on this, I think it's also, so there's the development part, but there's also a bit of training regarding like the filmmaking industry in general. So for me, that was very useful because especially for me coming from a different field, even though like photojournalism is quite similar to filmmaking in terms of like the technique, but in terms of the industry is completely different. So I mean, for me, it was like the help and the training was invaluable. I was, when I got in just for the development, I was so happy. I was like, oh my God, this is just, you know, beyond anything that you can learn at uni or in life. It's just, and also I could ask silly questions and without feeling awkward about it because we were all on the same boat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vicky, I think you had a question.
Yeah. Good morning. I want to ask a question. I mean, this question goes to Will and his colleague.
Austen.
The question is, what are the challenges they face in making the documentary?
All of them?
Well, the most important one, no, all of them, I know you will be going through a lot of, you know, bits and pieces, but what are the major obstacles you face?
I mean, yeah, thanks for the question, Vicky. I guess the main challenges, we would be lying if we didn't say that one of the main challenges was COVID-19, because it forced us to completely rethink our, not just the kind of story we were planning on telling, but it brought with it just changes to the practicalities. And I think it's something that all filmmakers and a lot of different people have had to adapt their ways of working around the pandemic. And it's no different for documentary filmmakers. We couldn't go in, we couldn't be near our protagonist. We kind of gave them cameras to try and allow them to capture their own perspectives. And I think it was partly, the biggest challenge for us was also around that, was the drawing out of the process, which was kind of initially promised to be shorter for our relationship with Sean. We were friends before we started making the film. And then to kind of enter this almost like more introspective relationship where you're making the film about that person, and then for it to kind of take a lot longer, it potentially, I don't know if it got exhausting, but there's more time for back and forth, like feeling better about it at certain points and feeling worse about it from Sean's perspective. Being unsure, never kind of seeing the final film, this thing that we were always kind of promising to do. And I think what Giulia said earlier about her relationship to the islanders and how she spoke truthfully and honestly to them about what her intentions were. I think there's just a lot of that. You have to remember, when you make a film about someone, it's always quite a unique experience for the person being filmed. And you kind of just have to take that into consideration and try and keep them feeling comfortable with the process, because I think it's probably quite, I can imagine it's a very uncertain and I can't remember what, just a uneasy time for them, especially when it sort of takes a bit longer and they're like, what, wait a minute, what are they doing? And so I guess the biggest challenge was just trying to tell the story and then trying to maintain that kind of their sense of, you know, sanity with what was going on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think contributor fatigue is definitely something that we experienced. So they go through it as well as us, and we always have to kind of reassure ourselves and revitalize ourselves that this is going to be a good film. But I think the other challenge with Sean was that we are so transfixed by his words and his music that it's very hard to leave stuff out of the film, because he's so eloquently spoken and just plays so incredibly well. We were kind of stuck with this vast amount of material that was really difficult to like condense down to a comprehensive story. And I think with the music, any documentary with music is really hard to cut, because basically you don't have time to put the songs in. So we essentially chose the music based on how it feeds the narrative to keep the film going. So it was less about kind of, well, not the quality. I mean, all the music quality was amazing, but the bits we chose kind of fed the scene, whether it was kind of like the montage of him and Anthony playing all those different gigs and kind of gaining momentum, or then the choice to use the out of tune piano. Oh, sorry, you haven't seen the film yet, obviously. But that's to bring the film down in a lull. And I think basically whenever you're dealing with musicians and you're cutting up their music, they never ever like it. And it's really, you have to always have that conversation that you have to compromise on the music, because even though they thought they played much better in that bit, it's not necessarily best for the narrative.
Thank you. If no one has got another question, I just wanted to talk to you a bit about distribution. So the films are about to have their world premiere at Glasgow Film Festival as a showcase. The films will be available from Friday, 26th, until the 1st of March. So if you've not booked your ticket, I would recommend you to do so now. It's really difficult for a filmmaker to imagine that their film is not going to be seen in cinemas and in festival just yet. So I was wondering, what are the positive aspects you can see in having your films distributed online for now? Can you say a little bit more about your thoughts on this as filmmakers? If your answer is none.
I have a very short answer to that, which is that like I was saying before, there's the stock car racing community is like an extraordinary, like sort of close-knit bunch of people, and they are right across the UK. So one of the advantages in having the digital screening is that wherever they are in the UK, you know, they're all in touch on social media. They're all telling each other about it. So I'm hoping, you know, a lot of them will get to see it who wouldn't have necessarily been able to make it to Glasgow in person.
So access to audiences and accessibility as well. Jack, I was wondering if you could maybe say a little bit more on that front, because you've made a decision with your film to make it accessible. So you can maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I've decided to burn in the subtitles and into the film, and there's a little bit of very minor audio description wherever it makes sense to do so as well. And it's something that's actually really normal in the queer community at the moment. Most queer film festivals they'll do it for you if your film doesn't have it, but they by default will screen all their films with subtitles. You know, and it's not just for people who are hard of hearing, but it's also for people who are maybe watching the film in their second language or, other reasons. I sometimes struggle if people are mumbling and I don't really know what's being said, and I find that very frustrating. So I made the decision to, for it not to be optional. Basically, you have to watch it with subtitles, and I think sometimes filmmakers find that very difficult because they want you to struggle on, they want you to focus on the visuals. And I would say that, I've made a very visual film, and I'm not worried about the subtitles being at the bottom at all. If you want to see, if you think you've missed something, you'll just have to watch it twice.
Thank you, Jack. So a lot of festivals have adapted and are offering accessible versions where available as an option, which helps broadening the audience as well and to the film. So yeah, that's one of the positive side of the whole situation. Any question from anyone? No? Well, I think we have about 10 minutes left. Oh, James, sorry, I didn't see you waving your hand. Go ahead.
So I just came in there after you said. I was just curious to know from each filmmaker, if possible, how much the story changed from the pitch that you pitched to the final thing that you made. Was there a big difference, or not a difference at all, or just curious to know?
I can answer that. So in my case, the story, I would say, is quite different from the original idea. So initially I wanted to tell a story about the community in general, and it wasn't naive enough to think that I could include different interviews from different people in a 15-minute film. And then through development, I realized that was not possible. And so I've been guided, I would say, to find a character that was going to be the main character, so that I could still talk about the community in general, but focusing on the main subject. And that's what I did. And then COVID happened, so my story changed even more, because the idea at the beginning was to follow this lady moving to the island. So he had a strong beginning, and then it was kind of an open ending. And then now it's the opposite, because you're gonna find out if she stays or not. So that's even different from, let's say, the second version. So lots of changes throughout the whole way.
Thanks.
Anyone else? No? So yeah, I was wondering if you could each say what you are up to now and what's coming next for you, because we've talked about your films, and it's a really difficult balance because no one has seen them, and we don't want to disclose anything. So maybe talking a bit more about your future projects will help.
Yeah.
Patrick, do you want to? Oh, I think we've
Sorry.
lost Patrick.
Jumped in.
No. Yeah, go ahead, Austen.
So Will and I are making our first feature-length documentary at the moment, with kind of support from Screen Scotland's Film Development Fund, and we've now been commissioned by BBC Scotland again. So we're making a film called Long Live My Happy Head, which follows the story of a Scottish comic book artist who's based in Edinburgh, and kind of is creating a comic book about his experience with brain cancer. And along the way, we kind of journey with him and his long distance boyfriend who lives in the United States, as they kind of have to navigate COVID and chemo but it's a story about kind of love and happiness, and the kind of the joy that is present in life when you're kind of like there to notice it. We're kind of looking at completing that film in the summer, and it should be broadcast on BBC Scotland later in the year, in the autumn, I think.
Thank you. Giulia, do you want to say what you're up to next?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see how this film goes, different festivals, and I don't have any specific plan for the future. I have lots of ideas and lots of new stories that I would like to pitch, and I'm working on those and see what happens.
Jack?
I'm actually shooting another short this upcoming weekend. It's another kind of hybrid form where we're kind of mixing fiction and animation, but it's based on a story by Adam Kashmiri, an Egyptian trans man in Glasgow. So it's fictionalized by Michael Lee Richardson, who's a BAFTA-winning writer. So we're shooting that this weekend. I'm very excited about that.
Good luck. And you, Patrick?
I'm just about to embark on the edit of a short film I made during the lockdown, actually with a couple of other directors who I met on the Bridging the Gap, about the relationship between two brothers who are food cycle delivery couriers. So looking forward to seeing where that goes, and trying to develop longer form projects to be confirmed.
Yeah, we're going to thank all the filmmakers, and there will be Q&As as part of the Glasgow Film Festival. So once you've watched the films, you'll be able to hear the filmmakers talking a bit more into more detail. So thank you all for joining us, Giulia, Jack, Will, Patrick. I think Austen had to dash off, but thank you so much for joining us, and good luck for this very strange yet quite exciting world premiere for all your films.